Hello, everyone. Welcome to
The BiCurean Podcast
another episode.
live stream.
Live stream.
It's December.
I'm used to live streaming now. I never thought that happened.
I know.
It's been, it seemed like such a large shift, and yet here we are.
Well, and it's been fun, and I'm actually super excited about our guest and our topic tonight. We actually almost started late because we're having so much fun talking to our guest that I realized, we have to start. You guys get to be part of the conversation too.
And he's a personal friend and a friend of the show, but I do want to set it up a little bit. So, let's just start by saying that a couple of weeks ago we had a guest on, and if you were lucky enough to view the live stream, that's the only way that you would have seen that debacle, because we never actually posted it live, because in the middle of it we realized that we were talking to somebody who had represented themselves as a medical or medical professional type medical doctor, even had doctor in their name, but it became very quickly obvious that they were not representing facts. And it was literally one of our first live streams, so I didn't know what to do. We just sort of hobbled through it. But let's just be clear that one of the motivations for this show, in addition to having a friend of the show and to talk about the things we were hoping to talk about, was also to really dive into some conversations around the misinformation that came out.
Yeah, and also we very cleverly titled this "Facing Facts About Health," and we being me, and part of that is because we'd love to invite people into a conversation about achieving health, but based on some factual stuff, and also we're interested in addressing misinformation that we may have accidentally put out there, even if only for 10 minutes.
So we're going to pretend the last one didn't exist, other than that we might reference some of the things that were said. But ultimately, this show is basically designed to be what the original goal of that previous show was, which was to talk about some health best practices and also misinformation that is widely available. Unless you're living under a rock, you've probably seen some of it.
And also how to evaluate a medical situation or where the information is coming from, so that you can make an informed decision or recognize when there's not the kind of information that you need, and say, hold on, before I step forward, I'm going to go look for a little bit maybe of a second opinion or something like that. Because it's something that our guest, who has their own live stream about medical myths. See how that all overlaps.
Are you saying we found an expert that might not have misrepresented? I'm sorry. Anyway,
it's possible. So at any rate, we're really, without further banter, because obviously we're awkward tonight. Welcome, Student Dr. Ben.
Student Dr. Ben, welcome to the show. Why don't we start? You can introduce yourself.
Hi, well, I'm Student Dr. Ben. I'm really excited to be here. I am a transgender third-year medical student, currently on rotations, and I have my own YouTube channel about kind of addressing social issues and medicine and how those intersect, how you can use science to address arguments in your everyday life related to biological sex, maybe talking about certain viral infections that are going around, and other such topics that have been the topic of debate recently. So anything that you get on my channel is not diluted. It's the content we talk about in medical school, because I don't think that overly simplifying information is helpful. So I break it into really small chunks, and hopefully it makes sense for people.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you do. I think it's very important. And as you kind of overheard, we had a guest that was represented to be that, but I don't even know the person who recommended this. It wasn't somebody that we knew. We just sort of trusted what we were told. But I think what you're doing, and this sort of thing, is really important right now. I'm a huge fan of science, and I do feel like having people with a scientific medical training, any sort of actual experience in this that's talking about it is so important, because there's a lot to offset right now.
Well, and people get, it's tricky because the information that is out there, especially with maybe certain viral conditions, it's so new that as the data changes, that lack of experience that we have with the whole condition can be used and leveraged to manipulate people because the reality is that whenever you're dealing with an organic situation or a human being, there's not really going to be a cut and dried definitive, this is the thing. And so people can be, but what about? And while it's good to keep an open mind, there's also I guess a tolerance range for what that needs to look like in order to be able to keep yourself from falling over the cliff of misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of problems with how science is presented in the media, and a lot of this has to do with the business of science and medicine. There is a lot of good information out there, but it's hidden behind paywalls a lot of the time, or it's hidden in universities, hidden in libraries where people can't access them, or people don't have the knowledge of where to look for these things. So you're asking people to have correct information, but then you're going to make them pay for the correct information behind this paywall. But then somebody else is going to show up on Twitter with some article that gives them an answer and they don't have to pay for it. So if you are a person looking for an answer and the only thing available to you is pseudoscience, you're going to read the pseudoscience and there's nothing to combat it because it's not accessible. And that's on us in the scientific community, because we could educate people. Knowledge is power, and we're not handling that well. I will admit that.
Well, and let's be clear. I just want to make the statement that I felt like there was a lot of bait and switch going on, even from the CDC and things like that when the pandemic started. Like how long has it taken us really to get past the fact that they said masks wouldn't help right off the bat, right? And now like we're still combating that. Of course, masks will help, but we needed to have a certain amount of. I honestly, I think they might have done it to prevent the thing that happened with toilet paper and a massive run on them that would have shut down, hospitals having enough of that protective equipment. But the reality is, like, we're still a year and a half later having a debate about masks because the first thing they said is not what they continued to say after.
Yeah, that definitely has something to do with it. And I think the way that we communicate what we expect the public to do is extremely important. And people want a confident answer, and they're going to stick with a confident answer. Where if someone says right off the bat, like, you don't need this or you do need this, they might believe that. But then most of the time when we're communicating science, we're very conservative in our language, which is appropriate. We don't want to make claims that are not substantiated. So oftentimes a professional is going to say it might contribute to this, or it's likely that this would happen, because you just don't know. There are exceptions to everything. You can't 100% commit, but people are not going to be as likely to listen to someone that says, oh, well, but we think it does this. That's not convincing to most people. So of course, the one thing that a group says that is confident is probably going to be the thing that they believe more about that person's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind,
we had a list.
We have a list.
Should we go to, and I think we shared it with you.
The best part, I think that's the best place to start. And
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start? I'll okay, so this was a thing. I asked you a question, but then I'm going to forge ahead without even getting your answer. So one of the things that came up that I'm curious about, because I had never heard this before, is that if I go to my doctor here in Colorado, that my lab results are going to be compared to other people from Colorado. So therefore, the standard for healthcare shifts geographically.
That's not the case. So, I mean, each
you're saying there's standards.
There's like so there's like a general standard of, like, what your vitamin D level should be. Is that okay?
Yeah. In each lab that does their test might have some small variations between their reference ranges, and usually they will provide the reference range that they're using on the labs that you get back. But the thing is, when we look at labs, it's not are you in the normal range or are you not in the normal range? There's a lot of nuance that goes into figuring out someone's labs, because like, you could be outside of a normal range and that could be normal for you, or you could be inside the normal range and that could be abnormal for you. So it's a kind of a guideline for what is the average that we see in the majority of of healthy people. So like if we took a bunch of people and we determined where their levels of say vitamin D were amongst these healthy people, what would that range be on average? Um, but that's not going to be the case for everything, and you have to take into account the nuance, their medical history, um, the clinical presentation. Because I'm not just going to look at an abnormal lab and like if I have someone who's like an 18-year-old healthy person that has like one lab result that's off, but nothing else is bothering them. They don't have any clinical picture that gives me suspicion of anything. I'm not going to take that lab and run with it and be like, you obviously have this
Mm,
serious condition because of this. Like, that's ridiculous. You have to
mhm.
go with context. Context is important. So it's all this big clinical picture. And a great example of where a lab value might need to be abnormal, anything that you would compensate for. Let's say you have anemia, so you're not producing, well, you don't have enough red blood cells in your body to transport oxygen. I don't want your values to be in the normal range because I would expect you to have low red blood cells. But there are a type of cells called reticulocytes, or they might also be called bands, and those are premature, like they're young red blood cells. So if you have a high amount of those, it means that your body's able to make more red blood cells. So if someone had a low red blood cell count and they had a normal reticulocyte count, I might be worried because that might tell me that they're not producing more blood cells.
Hmm.
So normal or abnormal isn't really what I'm looking at. It's the context of the clinical picture. So the when people fixate on a set reference range, that's a little bit concerning.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Thank you for explaining that.
Well, I mean, and it makes sense because the labs are supposed to be there, but I mean, they don't replace actual differential diagnosis, right? I
Oh
mean,
no, they just supplement. They're a piece of evidence in the bigger picture. You take every piece of evidence and you work through it together. And you also have to know that you might not have just one condition that's going on. They might have multiple health conditions and these might compete with each other. Like this sounds very counterintuitive, but this is why nephrology is such a difficult specialty because someone could have acidosis and alkalosis at the same time that are competing with each other and their labs look totally normal. But it's because
Mhm.
two opposing pathways are malfunctioning.
Yep. I learned that in accounting when I used to do bookkeeping for things. You can have the books balance and still have things be wrong, but
Mhm.
it feels a little more high stakes. Like,
Yeah.
and I didn't really think about that. Thank you for that. So another one, nature and nutrition as opposed to drugs. One is better than the other, more important.
Yeah, so this one is kind of complicated. And I do talk about this one on my channel a lot because they're all important. Nutrition is important, mental health is important, all of that is important. Um, but things that we find in nature, such as like herbs and natural remedies, they are chemicals in the same way that a pharmaceutical is a chemical. They have interactions with your body, they have interactions with other plants, they have interactions with your medications. But the problem here is that I see, the reason why I most of us lean more towards pharmaceuticals is that pharmaceuticals are regulated. So we take a plant, like a lot of these come from natural sources. They come from a plant or they come from like there's some antiplatelets that come from rattlesnake venom. That's how we make it. But we isolate a compound that we get from it, and then we kind of make it into a pill and like or in its pure form, and then you get exactly that compound that we're looking for. As opposed to if you have a plant, you don't know how much of the compound is in the plant. You can have, if a plant grows in different environments, it could have different concentrations of active ingredients. It could have multiple active ingredients. And it's just not something that you can pin down how much somebody is getting. So it's better to isolate these compounds, make it into a medication, have it regulated by a board, that can certify that it is an appropriate amount. Um, but they are both effective. Just the regulation can make it a lot more safe for people. And so I've actually seen, we had a patient on my internal medicine rotation who, um, he was from El Salvador, and there's a plant that grows there that is used in herbal remedies. And the same plant grows in the United States, but the soil concentration of different chemicals is different. So it holds on to nitrates in the United States soil.
Hmm.
So you get this buildup in the leaves, and this man ate these plants thinking that they were medicinal because that's what he was told back home. But the difference in the soil concentrations caused him to go into kidney failure and to go into liver failure. And he didn't want to tell anybody about it because he didn't want to be in trouble for it. His wife ultimately came forward and said something about it, but he didn't make it. Like, he died from a
Wow.
plant that was a natural remedy. So just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's safe. And you can use them. Like, there's definitely use for them. And if that is something that people want to use, you need to make sure that you're talking with a healthcare professional about it. Let people know what you're taking, because it might be the case that it could be an appropriate treatment for you. It could be an appropriate substitute for a pharmaceutical, but it also might be very dangerous. So I do think that there is use, but you have to be very careful and make sure that it's a safe product and that it's not going to interact with anything else that you're doing. So as long as you're in communication with your doctor about it, then I don't have a problem with it.
And two things come to mind based on you saying that. Like, two things I know that are very popular: St. John's wort and valerian root. But both of those have strong effects on the body, and actually similar effects to a lot of prescription medication. And a lot of people don't realize that there could be toxicity with valerian. St. John's wort can absolutely mess with your serotonin levels, and if you're on an SSRI or something like that, it can actually it could be
Yeah.
contraindicated based on medications, or if you aren't diagnosed, it could be contraindicated based on your condition.
Yes, St. John's wort is something that is very heavily tested on the medical boards for drug interactions. It is metabolized in the liver and can mess with an enzyme in the class of the cytochrome P450s, which metabolize pretty much every medication, every drug in your body. So it is one that we do study in great detail because it's known to have those effects. So yeah, be careful with stuff like that.
Right, but you can buy that, at the natural grocers down the street, and people recommend it all the time. Like, I took it, it made me feel better. Yes, so would an SSRI or various other different kinds of things actually prescribed by a doctor.
Well, and I out myself here in that I go to a psychiatrist, and the one of the things that I love about my psychiatrist is that they consider both supplements and medication equally as part of a treatment plan. So I went in and I got, a supplement, actually two supplements, a recommendation to exercise more, and one medication. And I feel like finding that kind of doctor is part of it, because for me, I want the opportunity to look at different options.
The key thing is she understood what the interactions would be,
Yeah.
how it would interact with prescriptions that she put you on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's worth noting.
She has a whole list of all the things that I'm
On.
taking, and whatever medicine. And so, and it is helpful I have a confidence in what I'm doing in a way that I wouldn't if I had just gone into the health food store and picked something up. And one of the supplements is actually both of them are prescription. They're not technically medications, but they're actually considered to be um, a normal, like a supplement, not a full on chemical thing. I don't know what the distinction is. I'm not sure why something is considered to be a supplement versus a medication. Actually, do you know? I have no idea why
I think
what
it
makes the
has to
difference.
do with the regulation and with testing. Like, I think a medication has to have like has to meet a certain set of standards, which is where we get into the weird ground with supplements. I forgot what the exact codes were, but there are two separate codes for when you're marketing a product.
Hmm.
And one of them is for pharmaceuticals, and it's like, has like this is regulated under this board. It has to have like this set concentration. It has to meet these criteria to be labeled as a pharmaceutical. Whereas you can make something in your garage, put a label on it, and sell it online, and that could count as a supplement. So, like, that isn't to say like there are some supplements and some supplement companies that do a good job at creating quality products, but they're lumped in the same category as people who are not making quality products. So that's where you run into some risk, and that's why you need to be in partnership with a healthcare provider that knows what they're doing, so then they can make sure you're on one that's produced from a reputable company and that has appropriate concentrations for you. And thinking about it this way as well, if you're getting a supplement from a psychiatrist, like they're regulated by the board of psychiatry. So they're documenting everything that they're prescribing you, everything that they're recommending for you, and they can be monitored by the board of psychiatry. They can easily be reprimanded if they did something that was inappropriate or doesn't meet standards of care. So you have those levels of regulation that you're not going to get. And of course, there are boards for naturopathy and chiropractic and stuff, but they're way more lax, and the education that they get is not at the same level as you would get in a medical school. So having a psychiatrist on board who is trained like that and is regulated like that would make me more confident in their ability to work with stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I felt it was, for me, it was help. I used to be pretty granola. I was fairly anti-medication for me. I didn't have an opinion about other people. And then I had a severe accident and I was like, oh, modern medicine is amazing. I did not know what this was. And I relaxed a little bit, and I think I've come to more of a place of balance around it. I tend to be extreme, I guess. Um, Micronutrients, what are they? Are they fact or fiction?
Oh, they're facts.
Okay. So
They're
what's
facts.
the okay? Because
A lot of people have been talking about these lately.
yeah. So
Just
what's
random people, friends.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's your experience of summary?
I mean, I think there's more hype to them than is necessary. It's something that people are kind of latching onto in the health fad community. They are necessary. You do need vitamins. You do need minerals. Like, these things are very important to have. Most people are not deficient in them because most people can get them from food. You can get them from, like, in our diet, as long as you are like eating a good diet for you. You're probably not going to be deficient in them unless you've been told, like, by by your provider that you're deficient in them. So yeah, they're true. You do need them, but there's more of a hype than is necessary. A lot of people that are jumping on the bandwagon probably aren't deficient and probably
Can you
don't need supplementation.
Well, can you explain real quick what micronutrients is even generally referring to? I mean, just to clarify.
Yeah, so if you have macronutrients being like carbohydrates, protein, lipids, like the big building blocks of cells in your body. You have micronutrients, which are often, it's like vitamins and minerals, and they're cofactors for enzymes. So they aren't the enzyme itself. Enzymes are usually proteins, but they help the processes in your body happen. Like, you need B vitamins to even do metabolism. The citric acid cycle requires B vitamins. Other processes require these microingredient I cannot talk today. Micronutrients
So wait a minute.
yeah.
Just to clarify, you're saying micronutrients are essentially vitamins. Like, you're probably taking a vitamin or you're getting them from your food, but we're not even talking about anything that's not.
But it's
we've all been taking our vitamins, right? Like,
it's a different delivery method, is my understanding. It's like and it can be targeted.
Well, and again, this is the misinformation part. That's what I'm trying to clarify, because what you're describing sounds like taking my Fred Flintstone vitamins.
Yeah, I mean, in the scientific community, like in the nutrition sphere, it's pretty much like a micronutrient just refers to a nutrient that's not one of the main building blocks. So there's nothing really all that fancy about it, but people are wanting to make something fancy about it so they can sell supplements.
I think that's what I wanted you to confirm. This is not new. It's not
Yes,
news.
it's not new.
It's not even unique. It's just a new term for something that's been already addressed.
Yeah. Well, and so I first heard about them from a close friend of mine who's a psychiatric nurse, and her experience of them was actually very beneficial to one of her patients and her child. And so she was very enthusiastic, and I wouldn't say over enthusiastic. However, she's been seeking to find some solutions for a couple of her patients and for her child for a while, and worked with a doctor who recommended these. And she was like, I didn't think like what you said, she's like, I didn't think a vitamin would have this much of a positive impact. So I think that's the other thing that happens. I think there's the marketing piece, but I also think when somebody has a good experience, especially with something they've been trying to address for a very long time, they become evangelical about what they discover, and it's understandable because it's the relief from the situation. But it's hard to. It's a little bit like hydrochloroquine to me. Hydrochloroquine helps some people in a very simple, in a very narrow way. So there's this evangelical excitement, but it actually was not a good solution, and the hullabaloo caused a lot of problems, right? And so similarly, I think it's how do we acknowledge, okay, you did have a positive experience, it's great, and that doesn't mean it's snake oil solution for everybody, right?
Exactly, and that's the thing that we face. Medicine's not it's not a one size fits all thing. And like with the micronutrients, you might have somebody who was deficient in some of their micronutrients, and that might be why they felt better. And it's okay for somebody to get those supplements of something that they need. But just because you needed that and you were deficient in that does not mean that everybody else is also deficient in that. Like they
Right.
might be okay without it. This might be something that was good for you and might be good for other people in a similar situation to you. But that's for them to then go talk to their doctor about. And that's where this needs to be a collaborative discussion. Because, yeah, you absolutely should be informed about your own health, but also understand that your expert plays an important role in that. So if you find out something that you want to try, you say, okay, I learned about this thing. And then you go talk to your provider and you say, all right, here's what I learned. Is this something that would be appropriate for me, or is it not appropriate for me? And then they can talk. Hopefully, I know we were talking about this earlier. There are a lot of doctors who do a very bad job at communication and listening. But if you have a good one, then they can like sit down with you and say, hey, yeah, I think this is a good idea for you. Or no, I don't really think this is a good idea. Like, I'm glad that you're putting effort into your own health. I don't think this is a good direction. And let's go in this other direction instead. Um,
So we have a comment from Be No Justice. Good point and an information. Supplements in general should not be taken unless you have your doctor check on their interaction. Is that
This
correct?
felt relevant to both the
Yeah, but
previous
that's both of
question
both.
and
Yeah.
this one.
yeah, it's pretty much what we were just saying. Yeah. Talk to your doctor about it.
So when it
But
says
don't
on
assume just because it's over the counter that
That-
it will not interact with your other medications or conditions.
or your health, right? Like I know I've definitely known people. What you were talking about earlier with St. John's wort. I had an associate several years ago who took it on top of an SSRI, which is completely contraindicated, and got serotonin sickness. And
Yeah.
it didn't. It luckily did not get extreme. They just had like constant headaches and one other symptom. But it wasn't good for a little while, and finally figured out what was going on. It's like, no, you're not supposed to take both.
Wait, you mean if you're taking something that works, taking more of the same types of things doesn't
no.
automatically improve the situation?
No, this more is better idea that
My
we have.
world's
is
shattered.
No, sorry.
What do?
That's not true with chocolate, though. No matter how much chocolate you've taken, you can always take more, and it's good.
I will now calculate the LD50 of chocolate just for you, Aisla.
Oh, thank you.
Now we need to find out how much is too much.
I will appreciate the facts, but deny them if they counter my desires.
All right, I will ignore that.
I want the facts. I definitely want them.
You just won't listen to them. All right.
No, of course not. I mean, I will, as long as they tell me what I want to hear. So, wouldn't it be great if all your patients were as honest as I am here, right? Like,
Oh, yeah, no, I would appreciate that. I would appreciate that.
All
So,
right, next question. We're going to dive into, when we had this previous guest on, it wasn't designed to be just a COVID show, but it was also
Mm.
like I thought we were getting on somebody to counter some of these specifically COVID myths. So
well, and
this
also
one,
to
this one dives into that.
well, and also to talk about as we're coming into another winter, what are good ways to improve maximize your opportunities for health so that you can engage with this situation we're in more effectively. So one of the statements that was made, if I'll just read it. COVID deaths are primarily or almost always due to comorbidity. So nobody gets really sick or dies from COVID unless they're already, I guess, bad off.
Yeah, this one bugs me a lot because there's some fallacious reasoning that goes in here. And I've heard this other places too of people even who work in hospitals saying that it's only people who are overweight and have chronic disease that die of COVID, which is not true. The actual studies say otherwise. People who work in pediatrics say otherwise. Children are dying, especially of this Delta variant now.
Mhm.
And we're dealing with a black swan fallacy in a lot of these cases where people are working in a hospital where the majority of people have comorbidities and they're saying I haven't seen a person without comorbidities die of COVID, so it's not happening. But that's why we have to do studies and isolate these variables, have control groups, uh, kind of compare across different varieties of populations, because something I noticed about one person who was saying that was they were working at a hospital in Florida, and I don't know if many of you know, the majority of people in Florida in general and the majority of people in America in general have comorbidities or are overweight. And so if you tried to say, well, it's just these people. Well, of course. Of course, the majority of the most common population in the United States is going to be the majority affected. So you're not controlling for that potentially being a confounding variable. And when I say confounding variable, it's a factor other than what you're looking at that can mess with your data. So if we're looking at COVID killing people, you have these other factors such as age, diabetes, weight, and if you have hospital A that has the majority of people have comorbidities, um, of course, the majority of people that die in that hospital are going to have comorbidities. That just happens.
I think you nailed it. The key thing there, though, is that if it's an invalid data source
Mhm.
to say that what you're seeing is these comorbidities. Well, yeah, certainly. And look, I do think there's some truth to the fact that some people, with like that are overweight or unhealthy or have diabetes or have things. Yeah, I mean, they have a harder time with a cold. So that's all fine and good. But the idea that it's actually accurate to say that basically if you are perfectly in health, which I think this actually speaks more towards we have a bias towards, as you know, probably from some experience with being trans or a lot of other situations, the minute it gets outside of the norm, it's just easy to
Yep.
blame whatever the not normal aspect, of it
No,
is.
absolutely.
So, I see that a lot as well. And that's why I think it's really important to point out to people like there are plenty of people I was reading stories in New York Times and all sorts of other news outlets of people that were like, "What? But I'm not fat. How can I be on a ventilator?"
And something here too. Sure, these people with obvious comorbidities, like yeah, they're at increased risk. But a lot of people who don't have obvious comorbidities might have a comorbidity that they didn't know about. 'Cause there are plenty of
Autoimmune
people.
issues. Autoimmune
Yeah, a
issues
lot of
came up a big time.
yeah, a lot of people with autoimmune issues don't know they have them until a crisis happens. Um, and even such things like, I mean, let's take sickle cell anemia, for example. This is a great example for COVID. If you have sickle cell anemia, you have like full blown disease. You're going to be symptomatic most of the time. Um, if you have sickle cell trait, you only have one copy. So you might present normal most of the time, but in a case of an infection or some kind of major physiological stress, you could experience sickling in your blood, and you could have obstruction in your blood vessels that causes you to have lung problems, or even problems in your brain, problems in your kidneys from a sickle cell crisis. You can have that and not know about it until you have a crisis happen, like COVID. If you got a viral infection like COVID and you had sickle cell trait, you might have a sickle cell crisis. And that might be your first time ever knowing that you had sickle cell trait. Also, people who didn't know they had asthma, now getting COVID, knowing that they have asthma after they get that because they have an inciting event, something that causes them to go into a crisis. There are plenty of conditions that happens with. So no one is 100% immune. You don't know you don't have a comorbidity. And even people who are confirmed to not have comorbidity still have a chance of death.
Here's the deal. I mean, I think it's pretty much a desperation move to be like, well, I'm not fat, so therefore, it's not going to get me. Like that sounds more like reality avoidance than any kind of scientifically based fact. I think that was a lot of people that were just trying to, make things okay.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to societally address, is that you can't live in a world where you're trying to like differentiate, the victims here, and how you're not going to be that. Like that's just not a wise
Mhm.
place to live, and
Yeah.
it's not realistic.
Well, so hi, Titan. And thank you, Randall, for the warning about reading your full name. Latest news out of South Africa: less than or about 10% of those hospitalized with Omicron are toddlers 2 and under. So we have to stop pretending this doesn't affect kids. Sorry about that. I'm just managing to think. Hello. Sorry about that. But one of the things that bothered me right from the beginning with this was that people say, "Oh, kids aren't going to get sick," and I finally understood that they were talking about, oh, kids have that immune system that is a little bit, because it's less developed.
More highly adaptable.
Mhm.
That made more sense to me. But at first I was just like, what magical thinking is this? Somehow they're just gonna be okay.
When
Um
I had somebody who was a pediatric student at the time tell me, yeah, we're just not worried about it because I work in pediatrics. And I'm like, this was right at the beginning of it in March of last year.
Oh,
And I was
they're
like,
worried now.
yeah,
They're worried
exactly. I'm
now.
like, that doesn't, I mean, even if you're not seeing the direct cases of it, please tell me you're worried about it. I'm worried about it. Why aren't you? So,
Yeah, no, exactly. I was like, I mean, I don't even know. And I did appreciate there was some science behind it. Although you can correct me, I seem to be like there was that awareness of like, oh, they have this immune system that's a little more adaptable. But it didn't seem to me like we should just be like, well, then let's just not worry about it. Like we, what is that?
well, you could probably answer this, Ben. Did you
Yeah.
notice, did Delta actually change things, or did people just start paying attention to it more?
I think it did change the risk for children. At least fatality and hospitalization for children. And this is an anecdote, so not evidence, but my friends who are pediatric residents right now they're slammed. They're absolutely slammed in their hospitals.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
A friend of many shows, our friend Julia, who a lot of the people know, had literally graduated with her respiratory therapy degree 2 months before COVID hit. So
that sucks.
she didn't even actually, it's funny because she was supposed to start at the hospital she got hired at, and she was supposed to start and didn't actually get trained on ICU because
They didn't have time.
they didn't have time. They couldn't start training her in getting her ICU certifications because they were too slammed.
Mhm.
So it's funny that, a lot of people, they think, didn't know what to expect. And it's interesting to hear the pediatric people kind of having, it's anecdotal, but I tend to believe those sorts of anecdotes. We know what our day-to-day life is. And if you live in this stuff at some point, whatever your profession is, when something is different about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been dangerous in general just with how packed the hospitals have been. And I've said this on multiple channels. The fact that ICUs are filling or full is bad news for everybody. There's a big difference between being admitted to the ICU and supposed to be in the ICU but moved to the regular med surge floor, because the med surge floor does not have the same resources that the ICU does. The ICU has clear walls, clear doors. You have nurses and doctors in a small area where they can access you a lot quicker if something happens. It's a smaller ratio of people to like uh, fewer patients per doctor, fewer patients per nurse, so their attention can be focused on the emergencies that happen. You go to the med surge floor. The doors are solid, walls are solid. You can't see behind them if something were to happen. You have more patients per nurse, more patients per doctor. The hallways are more spread out. You have doctors going all over from floor to floor. They're not immediately accessible. So if something were to happen, the response time is a lot longer on the med surge floor than it is in the ICU. And studies have shown that response time, if you were to code, I mean, if you're to code from anything, if you were to go into cardiac arrest from anything, but especially if you were to go into cardiac arrest from COVID, that response time makes a world of difference to save
Right.
you.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of another article that was probably one of the scariest things I read right at the beginning of everything. And it was pretty much a person on the street account from an EMT in New York City. And he said specifically, he's like, I've never had this many deaths in a day right in front of me, or people that were already too far gone. And he even brought up, he's like, they all, their families were all saying that they were sick with something that was obviously upper respiratory, but what they died from that I put down was a heart attack, because that's what I witnessed and that's all I have. And I couldn't ask the corpse what his condition was before the heart attack.
And they weren't testing for COVID, and
But
certainly
they
going to
were
test the corpse
just
for
they were
it.
just getting to where they were starting to test and actually see what it was like. But I mean, even that right there, was very telling along the lines of the kinds of complications that can happen. And yes, if you are sick with this, it can get bad very fast. And being in the ICU or having those resources will make a difference.
And that was something that has bugged me a lot too, with people saying that, well, these people aren't actually dying of COVID. They're just writing COVID on the death certificate, but that's not what's happening.
Well,
No,
to
it
make
is what's happening because COVID causes hypercoagulability, and it can also cause cardiomyopathy. It can cause ARDS is the biggest thing. I like to say ARDS because I think I'm funny, but
we think you're funny too, so it's cool.
but you get these complications because of the mechanism that COVID has in the body. And if you cause myocarditis, especially dilated cardiomyopathy, where the heart, like you damage the muscle tissue, and so the heart gets big and expands like a water balloon, like you're filling it up. The valves get messed up, and you can go into atrial fibrillation because now it can't pump right. And then
Yeah.
atrial fibrillation just smushes blood together, it coagulates, and then you get a stroke or you get a heart attack. Or you can get, in a different mechanism, you can get pulmonary emboli or deep vein thromboses. Um, and your lungs just become fibrotic. Like these are all conditions that come from the virus, but you have to put the end. It's like ARDS secondary to COVID infection.
I think this is actually, I don't know if you're being funny, Titan, but this is actually an important point. If you fall off a ladder and have a punctured lung and they can't get to you because there are 40 COVID patients ahead of you, I mean, it actually happened. My friend's mother was really sick and they had to go to 3 emergency rooms. This is about,
to get admitted.
Yeah, this was about 4 weeks ago, and in here in Colorado, and we were only at like 78% full in terms of our hospitals. And it was really bad. And she was very concerned about her mother's health. And she was very concerned about her being able to get treatment because there were so many COVID patients. They were having trouble finding an ICU for her. And so I don't know. I just think that's an important thing for us to acknowledge, that if people are dying because they can't get care, that's equally, it's not necessarily they died of COVID, but it is why we are having these problems. Like that was why we need people to not overexpose or, avoid what they can, I guess.
Yeah, look, here's the deal. Again, it's one of those things, nobody thinks about going to the hospital. until they're on their way there.
Yep.
And just know that you might take for granted the kind of service, wait times and stuff like that. I can just tell you, I mean, in the middle of flu season, the couple of times when I've had like bronchitis of doom, and it's like, oh God, I need some sort of immediate help with this. And you still sit there for 4 hours. Like,
Yeah.
and that was before COVID. Let's just be clear.
Right. No, it's rough. Another one was antibodies are equal to vaccination.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of data about how long natural immunity will last. There's a lot of debate about that, a lot in the scientific community about that. If you want the current consensus on how long they think natural immunity lasts, go look at the CDC data. They should have something about that. But the thing is, with natural immunity, in order to get natural immunity, you have to get COVID. And people who are anti-vax, they usually have some reason why they don't want to get the vaccine. A lot of them will quote myocarditis as a reason to not get it, or they'll
My
quote
friends just pulled that out. They're like, I don't want an enlarged heart. I'm like, that's
okay, the risk of you getting myocarditis and cardiomyopathy from COVID is what was the calculation? It's several times greater. I think it was like 70 something times greater. We're getting it from COVID, the virus, than getting it from the vaccine.
Yep.
Well, and I feel like that's really important that it's another fallacy where because people are comparing, oh, I don't want to get that because not getting vaccinated will keep me from getting that. But your higher risk of getting COVID means you then are increasing your risk of getting an enlarged heart. If you're really worried about it, the vaccine is actually your better option for preventing it.
Oh, definitely. And something too with the vaccine. So very, very few people get complications from the vaccine. They do happen, as with any medication. There's going to be some people that react to it. But the good news is we know what these side effects are, and you can be treated for them pretty easily. They know how to handle this stuff. So, and you're getting COVID at home or wherever, COVID's a lot harder to contain. It's a lot harder to treat, especially when it gets serious. You got hospitals filled. If you get a reaction to the vaccine, you're way more likely to be fine after that. You can get treated for that pretty much on the spot now.
Well, and there are people who can't get the vaccine. They actually do
Yeah.
have conditions, autoimmune conditions that make the vaccine an incredibly high risk for them. And that's the thing that I find to be offensive, honestly, is that there are folks who can't do it or really shouldn't. And their ability, their freedom has been highly curtailed because they are stuck in a very
Yeah.
limited situation in their world due to other people like, I want the freedom to go to the grocery store or whatever. It's just like, come on.
well.
And this is
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I've actually been floored by the amount of selfishness that's come out around that sort of thing. Because
Yeah.
even when masks were coming out, I think Fauci and other people thought this would actually be a positive thing to say, no, if you wear a mask, you're actually protecting the people around you, which actually seemed to turn people off more. I'm like, oh, I get it. Like this is a trade-off. You wear your mask, I'll wear my mask. I'm actually preventing me breathing on you, and you're preventing breathing on me. So we're actually doing this for each other's benefit. And that actually seemed to like backfire. Like people were more angry and pissy about that. I'm like, oh, we live in a very bad country right now if that's the case for, a portion of the population.
What something I did want to mention about the people who can't get vaccinated. There's a couple points about that that I'm pretty passionate about. Is number one, people who have an autoimmune condition, and I've gotten into conversations with some people about this because I think there's just some misinformation about what this means for people. People who have autoimmune conditions who will say, yeah, I can't get the vaccine because I have this condition. Like, okay, did you talk to your doctor about it? No. Did you talk to a specialist about it? No. Okay, well, you don't get to make that determination for yourself because there are a lot of people who have autoimmune conditions who still can get the disease, or get the vaccine. So what you need to do is you go to your primary care and you say, is this okay for me, or should I not get it? And they will tell you what they think. And oftentimes, if you have a really severe autoimmune condition, you have a rheumatologist or you have an allergist or somebody who's a specialist on that. And a lot of allergists are saying that most of the time you can still get a vaccine, just they have to take some precautions and might have to monitor you more with it. So be sure that if you think you have a contraindication, that you're doing your due diligence and going through the avenues to actually confirm that you can't get it, or to see what modifications you can make to your own treatment to where you can get it. But then also, I've seen people pull up some weird reason why they can't get it and then just be like, "Oh, well, that's it. I guess I can just go about my normal life and like I'm not obligated to get this vaccine." Like, no, okay, this is a scary situation. If you are in a case where you cannot get the vaccine, you are compromised. You are comorbid. You are at high risk for complications. Like, this should be a sign that you should not be going out very much. You should be taking all of the precautions. Like, it's not permission to go out and live your everyday life as if COVID's not happening. It's
Mhm.
not a get out of jail free card. It is, you need to buckle down and do more to save yourself than other
Mhm.
people.
Well, right. And like I said, I mean, I'm a firm believer in secular humanism, but it does come down to this. There's right and wrong and greater good concepts in that sort of thing. It's the it's half the reason I was on Neil's show a couple of weeks ago was because I've always believed in this, but this all falls under that. Like, it is your civic responsibility, I think, to protect yourself and the people around you, and that's where masks and the vaccine are really at. Like, I don't really care what people want to do if it only affects them, but these are choices that people make that affect the other people around them.
Mhm. And I do want to add, and we've talked about it before, but just to reiterate, there's a lot of situations, and we're not trying to speak for everybody. We
Mm.
recognize there are folks who have legitimate health issues. There are folks that have a historical trauma with regards to the medical
Yeah, I was gonna
community,
say,
with regards to our government.
most
So
black people who are aware of what the Tuskegee experiments were have a legit concern for some
yeah,
of what
and
They
medicine has
have
done to
one of
them.
the most legitimate reasons
Mhm.
ever.
The Native
Not
American
not saying that's happening
populations.
now, but I get it.
And the thing is that there are plenty of folks, and so if it's I'm not in a position in my world where I want to in some way assert there's some like your situation is yours. It's but there's this general awareness that I stand with, which is if you don't have those, if it's more you're uncomfortable and you're not actively seeking a way to get understanding or get comfortable, then it doesn't feel so much like it's a concern so much as it is a form of entitlement or ostrich head buried in the sand. And I'm going to challenge you on that. And you know maybe you'll come back at me and we'll you know I'll realize that I'm being a jerk. However, I am going to challenge that because I feel like it's really important for us to note the difference between I just don't feel comfortable versus this isn't a good choice for me. It's dangerous,
Or I
my
can't.
I can't, or the history that my community has is a genuine barrier to trust here.
I also like really, and I'm gonna be harsh for a second.
Cool.
Like, I don't want to hear it from people who say, okay, well, the people who are dying are all old and fat, and that's their own choice. But I don't want to wear a mask because it's uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to hear it from you. That's
Hmm.
a choice.
Yeah.
That is
There was
like,
a there
yeah.
was a meme. It was like if you think a mask's uncomfortable, wait until you have a ventilator, and it's
Like,
just like
you're gonna victim blame people who
yeah.
have real medical comorbidities that are dying and saying it's their fault, but then you're gonna not help in any way by refusing to wear a cloth over your face when you go outside. Like, priorities.
Yeah.
Well, look, and I don't think anybody ever said that was going to be the miracle cure fix for the entire situation. All of this is small steps towards minimization, and we
Yeah.
can see where we're at. We're not far enough. Obviously, we're far from getting rid of this thing. And Titan brought up earlier, Omicron's an unknown. Like, it's a very serious cause for concern, and we just don't know. So now I think it's even more important. Like, we're in Colorado and just found that we had our first case out here today. So Here
Oh,
we go.
dang.
Yep.
See,
Mhm.
I'm from Colorado,
Oh,
so
there you go. Yeah, I mean, and we were just sort of waiting to find out when that would happen, right? Everybody in any part of the country that's paying attention to this is probably wondering when it's going to happen.
I would
Today was our lottery day. Yay.
I would bet $3 to feel that it's already in many states. It's just not been discovered yet.
Right. Let's be clear. By the time they've managed to track it, I don't know how much you've gone through epidemiology, but I do have a background in that myself. Usually, by the time you find something and actually have a confirmation of it, it's been there for a bit.
yeah.
Mhm. So we
Oh, yeah,
had
I'm going through epidemiology on my channel right now. I've got a series on
Ooh.
that.
I worked in food safety, and I actually wrote manuals on food safety, but a lot of it was actually just
So he
part,
was horrified by the way I store food.
well, that too, but a
It's
lot of it was talking about the epidemiology and tracking and all of that stuff. So when they were talking about tracking, these cases and trying to figure that out, we lost the ability to do that in the first like 2 weeks because it just blew up. But the reality is that's normal epidemiology. The other side of that is acknowledging that, yeah, like you can have all of the best tracking and run every sample that comes through to check for the new thing. But again, let's be aware, by the time you see it, it's probably been around for a minute.
Yeah, I definitely need to get you on my show to talk epidemiology for sure. We'll make that happen.
So I was a content. I was responsible for doing web design and content layout. So I was really just reading in depth all of the stuff that our subject matter experts were saying. So I'm not an expert per se. I just read a lot about it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
He
that's
is I would
fine.
say that he is actually a food safety expert. I
Well,
think
it's
so
funny
because
because
I have to say I think everybody who comes to my house is safer now because Eric is in my life.
the company I worked for, we were doing this training material for FDA. And so I got really into all of their policies. I was on conference calls with FDA all the time and got really into that. And let me assure you, um, they're not a well-oiled machine from my experience.
Oh, most government agencies are not.
I mean, most people don't have a reason to trust them. And I can assure you that, again, by the time they're like authorizing these things, whatever kind of weird committee meetings they've had and stuff, probably not much different than your average like dumb board meeting at a bad company.
We had one more. I know we're getting close to time, but I got one more I wanted to bring up, which is that I've heard this a lot, and I think we addressed this actually pretty well. But I'd love to get your thoughts on this, which is one of the big clarion calls that I've heard is, "Oh, this vaccine was rushed." But mRNA technology has been around for what 20 years. I mean,
A
it's been
long
a
time.
yeah, and so it's yes, um, they did expedite some of the procedures around the execution, but it was also just they didn't my understanding was they didn't pause in between the trials the way they normally would, and, they were using a technology that has been already tested in multiple ways. So could you speak just a little bit to that? And maybe the
Yeah, so
microchips?
yeah, so the technology that is used was definitely already being worked on a long time ago, and even in fact, the coronaviruses are nothing new. We've had coronavirus for a long time. This is just a new type of coronavirus that is doing more damage than the other ones would. Previous coronaviruses pretty much caused like a common cold, and so we don't worry about it. But these new ones are causing more problems, which is why we've been focusing on them, of course. But this technology has already been in the works for a long time. So this method of vaccination was already pretty much available. It's just now modifying it to be used for this specific coronavirus. So it's very easy that it could seem to be rushed, but in reality, this has been going on for a while, and it's just a new application of something we already had. But then also, kind of the biggest reason why studies take so long is because funding isn't always like given to one thing like all at once. Whereas with COVID, they've been prioritizing the COVID studies. Normally, you have to go through a lot of hoops to get funding for your research, and everyone's competing for the same amount of funding from a limited budget. And so, if you're taking away a lot of that, like red tape, it's going to be easier to get your study done. So, if something's a priority, it's a lot easier to get your study done.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes sense. But it's not, it doesn't mean that it was a.
Well, even the myth that this was something that the drug companies perpetrated to make money. I mean, we're getting to that level of conspiracy around this. I don't think this was ideal for anyone in any of these circumstances. And if anything, I mean, look, they were trying to do some due diligence. The reason why it took until January and February for these vaccines to hit, they had them in as early as November, but they didn't want to unleash them without at least doing some basic testing. They pushed that envelope. I will admit that, but they did acquire enough information and knew about the mechanisms of this well enough that it was worth the risk to rush and push this through.
And the funny thing too is, like, these vaccines have had more regulation and more testing than the majority of things that these naturopaths and chiros are pushing out. So I don't know what people shifted in the goalposts for what constitutes appropriate clinical study and what doesn't. It's like, if you're gonna go to your chiro and get some weird experimental like supplement thing, and not worry about how regulated that is, but then you're gonna say, oh, but this vaccine's hasn't been tested. Like, your goalpost has been shifted.
Well, and that was actually my aunt who she posted something she was like, they're using COVID to track you and, and everything. And I'm like, she posted that on Facebook from her smartphone. I'm like,
yeah,
yes,
get off of Facebook,
happening.
off Twitter, get off your phone. Like, don't get a smartphone.
No,
don't get any technology.
You are being tracked hardcore if you turn anything on that device. Like, let's admit that this is the number one way that everyone is being tracked. So I wouldn't worry about the shot you're getting.
We joked about it though when we got ours. I was like, oh, I got Pfizer, so the Apple chip is what I got,
Yeah, versus the Microsoft chip. And it's just crazy. I don't know what it is too. We live in a world of crazy conspiracy theories right now. Obviously, QAnon's finally seems to be sort of on the decline, but the reality is, yeah, I mean, I don't know where do people come up with this stuff. It's amazing. Like, the creativity. They should be writing movies and books. It's a great story. Right. If I didn't know that you believed it.
So Sinister Porpoise wants us to get a little more technical, or they were being funny, and then I'm going to get in trouble.
I know the direction that Sinister Porpoise wants to go, and I know they want to go into the world of computers, and I don't know computers, so I'm sorry, bud.
Sinister Porpoise, if you want to come talk about tech, if you want to come talk about computers, just shoot me a message. We're fine. We'll have you on here.
Well, we are getting towards the end here. I do want to thank you, Student Dr. Ben, for your time tonight. I've enjoyed the time we've hung out in many other random places, but I'm definitely enjoying our little internet family that is well represented in the chat here. But again, I thank you for what you're doing. Like, for real. We need some voices of reason, and I consider myself well educated, but I'm not going to school for this right now. So I appreciate the people. And I know what kind of a busy schedule you probably have, and taking time to do this feels important.
I really appreciate it. And I'll just also say, like, when we had the show, and I felt, I don't even know how to explain how awful I felt. And Student Dr. Ben was like, I got you. It's okay. We'll handle this. We'll go out there and we'll put the right kind of information out. And I just appreciate that support. And it's one of the things I love about our internet family and the live stream and podcast community. There's a lot of really great pockets of people that are genuinely interested in showing up and helping one another out. And I feel so grateful that this is something that we get to do with you and with the folks who are listening and our people in the chat. So thanks all for being here. Oh, and let me put your
so we're not quite wrapping yet. That was just a long thank you, but we're gonna put up your link here. So by all means,
tell people about you or how to find you.
Pimp your
thanks
shit.
for having me on. So there's my link tree in the chat. I'm Student Dr. Ben. I'm on YouTube, talking currently about epidemiology. I also have some videos about abortion. I have videos on biological sex. I have a show I do every Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, called Medical Myths, where I talk about medical myths. And what not to do with your body. And then I also have on Twitch, I sometimes play superhero games. Sometimes I do trivia nights on Fridays. Well, every Friday I do trivia night on Twitch at 9 p.m.
We're going to have to join you for that sometime.
Oh, it's a fun time. And then I am also a guest on Nat One Heroes, becoming more than a guest now, but you all have to stay tuned for that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a fun show. I'm glad that Isla found that, because I don't know that we'd actually know a lot of you if she had accidentally tripped into that
No, I wouldn't.
situation.
Someday I'll tell the story because it's kind of funny, but not today.
Oh, I will definitely
That's
listen
a
to that.
teaser. That's a teaser. See, I'm learning how to
Yes.
do this.
But I don't at this point. I'd be happy to invite you back as our primary medical question person. So next time we
I'd
get a
be
pile of
happy
these
to come back.
questions up, yeah, I'd love to have you back on. And
Yeah. Well, and at some point we should talk about
you're our official medical correspondent on the BiCurean Podcast now.
There you go.
Congratulations. we'll send you a hat.
I want a hat now. I want a hat.
We have hats? Why don't I have a hat? What is
Well, no, you
wait,
gotta
Ben
go.
gets everything.
I didn't
Ben
tell
gets
you.
Julia.
But
Ben
you-
gets a hat.
You gotta go make hats now.
I have to make hats. Why do I have to make hats? It's not fair.
So I just volunteered you
Oh
for
my
it.
gosh, voluntold me is what you did. Well, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for showing up. We'll probably do a show in a couple weeks, but we have absolutely zero plans around it. That tells you a little bit about how my December is going.
Well, we've been covering a lot of heavy subjects, so I think we're going to make a commitment verbally in front of the world and everyone right now that our next show is going to be lighthearted, maybe holiday related, or some sort of cheer.
Maybe Mikey
I
would
need
come
some
on for
damn
that.
cheer. So
we talked about that.
Yeah.
So put him on the spot.
What we should do is almost like we'll do a cheer fest hangout or something, a la the Neil post podcast hangouts or something.
Ooh, I like it. We'll just do like we won't even do a really normal show, just a hangout.
Just a hangout. We'll all just chat and talk about what sucked about 2021 and what we want to be better in 2022.
What the first BiCurean holiday party? That's it.
There you go.
2 weeks.
See, I just came up with this idea.
2 weeks from now, first BiCurean holiday party. You're committed.
We'll come up with more details on that. It's a rough sketch right now, but
that'd be awesome.
All right. Well, thank you again to Student Dr. Ben. Thank you again to all of the lovely folks hanging out in the chat. And thank you to all of the listeners who will download this and listen to it, as we have a ton of downloads. So we appreciate our ongoing. We started as an audio podcast and people are used to downloading us, and it's still continuing. So we get to do the benefit of a live show and people get to listen to this. So thank you to you listeners as well.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.